The Sacrilege may be an Amarr vessel, but it's an Amarr vessel that's a heavy assault cruiser, it's an Amarr vessel that uses missiles, and it's an Amarr vessel that's done away with that horrific bone and gold coloration and instead gone for the much more handsome Carnage Kingdom black and silver. The Sacrilege is a ship that I like, and I've showcased it in Abyssal Dead Spaces before, but I decided that now was the time for me to undock it, take it for a spin, and try it in each of the different C3 ratting sites, just like I did for the Vagabond, and just like I'm going to be doing for all the other heavy assault cruisers as I eventually get round to them. Why do I make rods for my back like this? Anyway, in today's video then, I'm going to be taking the Sacrilege through all 4 of the different C3 ratting sites to see how well it can handle them and answer the question, is the Sacrilege a good ship for running C3 anomalies? Ahoy there folks, I'm Captain Benzie and welcome back to another video for EVE Online. In today's video, I'm going to be revisiting the Amarr Empire Sacrilege, or technically the Carnage Kingdom Sacrilege, and yes, I do draw that distinction because I don't really like the concept of flying the god-bothering laser monkey ships. Instead, I like the fact that this is a chunk of black and silver badassery armed to the teeth with missiles. It's just so much cooler that way. I can pretend it's not an Amarr ship for the duration of me piloting it. Now, recently I've had a bit of a mission. I've had a few people mention to me that I'm always showcasing my wormholing ratting fits in C3 Fortification Frontier Strongholds, and, well, okay Benzie, that's all really well and good, but everyone's running the Fortification Frontier Strongholds, which means we have entire systems with Oruze and Outposts and solar cells. What can run those? So I wanted to try and find ships that could use one fit for running all 4 of the combat sites. So that's what we're going to be looking at here with the Sacrilege. One fit that runs all 4, which means the fit is probably going to be optimizable for different sites if you're just running a solar cell or a Fortification Frontier Stronghold or an Outpost or a ruse or whatever. You probably can tweak the fit to better do that site in specific, but I wanted one fit that would do everything. So join me after the break to find out everything that I have learned. Now, if you do enjoy this video, if you find it useful, please take that brief second just to hit the like button, and if you want to go the extra mile to help support this channel, you can do so by heading to my Patreon page, PayPal, tip jar, and my Redbubble merchandise store. I have a referral link in the description down below that can get you 1 million free skill points. If you've not used a referral link before, you can use it on existing accounts as well. Really easy, 1 million free skill points for you is a great start to EVE Online. And finally, we have, of course, the Catskull Discord. Come chat with like-minded individuals who love EVE Online, and if you are heading up to FanFest this year, come say hi, I'll see you there. Anyway, all of the usual messaging out the way, let's jump right in to talking about the Carnage Kingdom Sacrilege Heavy Assault Cruiser in C3J Space ratting sites. Now, normally in these videos, I like to do a deep dive into the hull itself, looking at its traits and how that's going to affect things, but ultimately for the Sacrilege, I've kind of already done that with the Abyssal Dead Space fit that I showcased. The brief rundown of this is that you need to have a Amarr cruiser trained all the way up to 5. You're going to want heavy assault cruisers to 4 at the very least. I have recently got mine up to 5, and it is such a big difference, and for this particular ship and the fit, I would strongly recommend getting this to 5 as quickly as possible. It's not quite as important as some of the others because it's not to do with our survivability. All of our survivability is based on the Amarr cruiser skill, not the heavy assault cruiser, but the fact that you can kill things just that little bit faster is going to help you in certain anomalies, in certain waves where you really need to take out a target very, very quickly to avoid dying. So it is kind of important. We are also going to be using assault damage controls, so I'm going to spend a brief second talking about why I'm using an assault damage control over the other types of damage controls or other types of tanking that I could put in that low slot instead. Essentially, an assault damage control is similar to a standard damage control in that its passive fitting gives you a bonus to your shield, armor, and hull resistances. It's not as big a passive buff as a standard damage control unit, but you do have an activatable mode. Activating that mode means that for the next sort of 8.789 seconds, basically, for the next 9 seconds, your resistances shoot right up through the roof. It's basically an oh crap button that you can press when you are starting to take a crap ton of damage, or if you're expecting to take a crap ton of damage in the next 9 seconds. And there are instances in some of these anomalies where that will save your life, and so you're going to need to know when to press that big red do not die button. It's really that simple. Also, again, as I've said before, when it comes down to it, the fact that this can only be fitted to assault frigates and heavy assault cruisers means that when I'm flying those ships, I'd like to have one fitted. It feels like you're using the ship that can use the thing. If you're not using the thing, I don't know, maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just me. It's not as serious as, you know, armor tanking a Caldari vessel or shield tanking an Amar ship or using other things. But it's there on the bonuses, you know? I kind of want to use it. Anyway, that's the Assault Damage Control unit. We are essentially looking at trait bonuses that are just going to give us damage from heavy assault cruisers, survivability from a Mar cruiser, which you'll need to have at 5 anyway, and we have that ability to fit assault damage controls. So, with all of that said and done then, let's talk about the fit in specific. Now again, I will have this in the description down below. You can copy paste it into the game, you can drop it into Python or any of the tools like that to see how this would work for you. And this is, again, I stress, designed to be able to run all 4 of the C3 sites without needing to refit between any of them. I know it is quite a popular thing to refit between individual sites, or heck, even refit sometimes between different waves in order to get faster clear times. But that's a schlep that I just cannot be bothered with, so you know what, I'm going for one fit that fits everything. This does mean if you are running just one type of C3 combat anomaly, if all you have is Outpost, Fortification, Outpost, Frontier, Strongholds, or all you have is Oruze, then you can change the fit accordingly to make that go a little bit better. It's entirely up to you. I'm going for the one size fits all, and I would love to hear from you in the comment section down below how you modify this fit for your own specific needs. So, let's actually take a look at the fit, starting with those high slots heavy assault missile launcher 2s, because I love hams. Interestingly enough, I'm not actually a fan of cold meat, so I won't eat a ham sandwich, but I do love heavy assault missiles. That's a terrible joke, Benzie. I'm not sure I'm going to keep that in the final cut, but if you're listening to this, well, apparently I did. Anyway, heavy assault missile launcher 2s. You can use any type of heavy assault missile in here. I just go with a crap ton of Caldari Navy Inferno because I've got a load of them sitting around and they're cheap. I tend to save my Scourge ones just for the Caldari ships that have specific bonuses, but you can use Scourge, Inferno, Mjolnir, or Nova. Any of those will work quite comfortably. Sleepers have Omni resists, so the damage type doesn't really matter. I go for the Caldari Navy versions because they're not quite as restrictive as the Tech 2 variants. You'll notice here as well, this only has a 26 kilometer. We're going to need 30 kilometers of range on this in order to be able to hit things like the Awakened Upholders that have this really annoying ability to just sit and orbit you at 30 kilometers. So obviously this isn't going to hit them, sorry. That's why we have the tracking computers that we're going to talk about later on. You can carry Rage and Javelins, but for me, again, just to keep this really simple, Caldari Navy Infernos, I'm sitting on about 12,000 in the cargo here, I'm just using those. Caldari Navy Mjolnir, Caldari, whatever, doesn't matter, just whichever one you prefer, whichever one's cheapest, launch those at the enemies, and don't really necessarily feel like you have to use Rage or Javelins. They can be useful, but I just keep it simple and go with that. The other high slot is a utility core probe launcher with 8 core scanner probes, just in case our connection gets cut off behind us and we need to find a new way home. Now again, talking about that range issue then on the missiles, let's simulate this. I'm currently running 2 Missile Guidance Computer 2s, one with a precision script, one with a range script. I do also carry a spare range and precision script, so if I ever need to double up on either of those, I can do. This is how it's going to be running for the most part though. The missile range script, when it's active, pushes those heavy assault missiles out to 32 kilometers. That is now sufficient to hit those Awakened Upholders. I wouldn't go with anything that is 30 kilometers due to how missile flight velocity works and flight times, that if you are moving away from each other, if you're moving towards them and they're moving away from you, the missiles technically would have to travel further than 30 kilometers because they're aiming at the point they were at, and by the time they actually go to hit them, they've moved beyond that 30 kilometers. So you do 32 is kind of the minimum here. If I'm really struggling, or if I've got a couple of these on me that are webbing me and keeping a little bit further away, that is when I swap the precision script in the second one for another range script, and that will push things over. Otherwise, I have a precision script here just to help with application. Could be a target painter. I wouldn't go with a web because you don't really need it against the smaller stuff. You do decent enough damage anyway with just that. If you are struggling to hit the frigates because your missile application isn't great, that's when we swap the range script here for another precision script. It's that versatility that means I'm going for the missile guidance computer here rather than things like target painters or webs. Webs don't tend to really work because they like to orbit at 15 kilometers in certain cases, but again, it's entirely up to you. There are some frigates that orbit at about 8-9 kilometers, so you can get away with it for those. I found the guidance computers, dual guidance computers, one with missile range, one with precision, worked better, and if I needed to, I could just run 2 precision in order to hit the close frigates. We then have some propulsion in the form of a 10 meganewton Afterburner II. Keep it simple, no real need for anything much faster than that. It's good enough for our needs. And a bit of capacitor stability with the Republic fleet, large capacitor battery. Again, you could go for a Thuka, it's entirely up to you whether you're valuing a larger capacitor or better resistance to newts. In my experience, they both work out pretty much the same, so we're not going to stress it too much. For the tank, first of all then, we have the Assault Damage Control 2. Now you'll notice that with this not active, our resistances are as low as 63% here on the thermal damage, all the way up to 89 on explosive. If we activate that, we are between 90 and 97. That massively reduces our incoming damage by a not inconsiderable amount. This is also compounded by the fact that we have a reactive armor hardener on here as well. Reactive armor hardeners, I will do a video on this. I keep saying I'll do a video on it. Make an actual note, Benzie. Sit there and make an actual note. Get that video done. People are asking for it. Reactive armor hardeners basically respond to the amount of damage that they are taking. The actual damage that the ship is taking. So it looks at your current resistances and it sees how much damage you're taking and from what sources. It memorizes that during a 10-second cycle time, and at the end of the 10-second cycle time, it adjusts your resistances slightly, reduces some of your resistances and increases others in an attempt to basically flatline that damage. This does have a slight inconvenience that you'll see. This is going to be building up primarily thermal damage when we are standing around and just doing things normally, because our thermal resistance is 63, so that reactive is going to try and plug that hole nice and easily. But when we put the damage control on, thermal is still our lowest. Never mind, ignore me, I'm going crazy. Yeah, it's going to be trying to fill that thermal hole basically, and it does it really nicely. Does this mean you could theoretically use a thermal hardener here? Yeah, you could, but I honestly find the reactive works better, and just in case you start to take damage from other sources as well. If you're going up against other sleepers that are hitting harder with different types of weapons, then you've got that. It also works nicely, just if you are taking this ratting somewhere else. Finally then for tank, 2 medium armor repair 2s allow us to be healing up to 88.2 hit points per second on armor tank there. That's really quite nice. It's enough to keep us going, and we can overheat it if we absolutely have to. Otherwise, Ballistic Control System 2 for the last slot here. This one, if you really want to, you could drop it for some more tank. If you're not sure that 63% upwards is good enough resistances, spoiler alert, it absolutely is. You could drop that for some more tank, but I like to have that little bit of extra DPS. Getting 576.8 DPS out of here is pretty nice. Of course, you can get more if you are going to be swapping between rages and javelins and stuff like that, but I'm keeping it simple. 142.5 DPS, by the way, is drones. We have up to 50 megabits per second, so we can put 5 medium drones in there. Things like Hammerheads or Valkyries, stuff like that. Whichever drones you prefer. I quite like Hammerheads, they work really quite nicely. Infiltrators, not a bad option either. Those will do quite comfortably. Rigs are the final thing to talk about. Medium auxiliary nano pump just to sort of increase our armor abilities, and a medium bayloading accelerator increases our DPS to the point where we're getting that 576. I've forgotten the name of the blasted ship. The Sacrilege does have slightly lower missile DPS compared to some of the other heavy assault cruisers, so it is worth kind of propping that up a little bit, I feel, but its tank is just through the roof. It kind of makes up for its damage by applying additional tank, so it's kind of, that's the balance you're paying in the Sacrilege. Anyway, that is the fit. Let's talk about the different combat sites. First of all then, let's talk about the Fortification Frontier Stronghold. You guys know this is kind of my favourite site. It's one of the more popular ones to run. It's the one kind of everyone can run. Might be my fault for always showcasing it in videos. I don't know, I don't claim to have that kind of power. But the first wave you're going to be coming up against here is 2 Awakened Defenders, 2 Emergent Defenders. The Emergent Defenders are webbing frigates, the Awakened Defenders are standard DPS cruisers, and are pretty easy to kill. This wave, not too much of a problem. Just kill the frigates first, because the frigates are not the trigger. The Awakened Defenders are the trigger. You should have a bit of time when you arrive to drop the mobile tractor unit, bookmark that and make sure that everything's okay. start to just get up a nice bit of traversal going on there so that nothing's hitting you too hard. Those webs are going to slow you down a bit, but the Sacrilege has enough tank to just ultimately not really care. Do get your drones out and try and take them. The emergent defenders are kind of drone aggro-y, so be aware that they're going to try and aggro your drones and destroy them. That said, they go down so quick, you might get away with killing both of them without having to recall your drones at any point in time. Not too much of a problem this first wave, nice and simple. Now, the second wave of the Fortification Frontier Stronghold has 2 Awakened Defenders and 2 Awakened Upholders. Those Upholders are absolutely awful. They are essentially going to be webbing you and neutralizing you, and that does have its own issues. Certainly, you'd want to take both of those out first. Unfortunately, they are the trigger. You can only take one of them out at a time. Nuke one of them as quickly as possible. Be warned, this is where you need to have at least 30-kilometer range. Those upholders are going to web you. They're going to try and orbit at 30 kilometers away from you, and that makes closing the gap fairly difficult. This is why I always try to make sure that my weapons have some way of reaching out beyond 30 kilometers. So make sure that you've got at least one of your guidance computers running the range script. That will allow you to hit out beyond 30 kilometers. If you're really struggling due to lower skills or whatever, swap the second guidance computer to using an optimal range script as well in order to make sure that you are hitting those as best as possible. Take one of those out, then go for the 2 defenders, come back for the second upholder to finish off the wave. Once Wave 2 is down, Wave 3 is a little bit tricky for some ships. You do have a battleship in there, a Sleepless Upholder, that is also going to be neutralizing you. You've got another Awakened Upholder with its webs and its newts, alongside an Awakened Preserver, which has remote reps, and 2 Awakened Defender cruisers. Sounds like a lot, but it's actually fairly manageable. Get your traversal up nice and quickly so that that Sleepless Upholder isn't going to be dealing massive wrecking shots to you. Get the traversal up against that battleship as soon as possible. I tend to go for the Upholder first and foremost because it's quite quick and easy to kill. Chances are as well you've also got the setup you need for longer range shooting by time because you've killed an Upholder to end Wave 2 and start Wave 3. So going for an Upholder again to start Wave 3 feels like a nice, easy way of doing things. So use that, take out that first Upholder. After the Upholder, I tend to go for the Awakened Preserver because I don't like having remote reps active whilst I'm trying to kill a battleship. You can theoretically go for that first, but I just don't like the fact that I'm being neuted by 2 different ships. So getting rid of that first Upholder drops one of the newts and the webs. That allows you to take on the Awakened Preserver a little bit better, whilst you're closing the gap on the Sleepless Upholder. With both the Upholder and Preserver down, we move on to the Sleepless Upholder, which is the neuting battleship. Try and orbit this fairly closely. If you can get a sort of 5,000 meter orbit going, you tend to find that it just doesn't hit you. It's got really bad tracking and you should be okay getting away with that. Just takes a while to chunk through all of its armor and its hull, but when it goes down, you are pretty much done with this site because all you've got left then are 2 Awakened Defenders, which are straight up DPS cruisers. No difficulty taking those out. If you've survived that far, that is pretty much the entire site done for you. Solar cells are a little bit more complex, and I don't recommend them as your first attempt at J-Space ratting, simply because the first wave does have a scram in it, so if anything does go really, really wrong really quickly, you can end up unable to run away. Anyway, Wave 1 then, we always have a cruiser, an Awakened Upholder. This has webs and newts. If you've done the Fortification Frontier Stronghold, you should be intimately familiar with Awakened Upholders at this point in time. Web plus newt is always a bad combination. It's neuting you out whilst slowing you down and increasing the amount of damage you're taking. That would be my absolute priority target in this first wave. You'll also guaranteed have an Emergent Preserver frigate, which is a scram, web, and a newt. Not too much of a problem, the newts are a little bit gentler, the web is still nasty, but it is only a frigate for its damage, so we go after the Awakened Upholder first, then the Emergent Preserver afterwards. Now, there is the possibility of a Sleepless Defender battleship also being in this first wave. It's not always there, you can see in the footage here. I did get it in this spawn just to make sure that you could definitely do this. You'll see that, again, I do take quite a bit of damage in this opening wave, and I do need to make sure that I'm using my assault damage control just to reduce the amount of damage you take as you try to get your traversal up against that battleship. It can be a bit of a finicky manual pilot to get your traversal up against the Sleepless Defender, whilst also trying to close the gap with the Awakened Upholder. Be aware that because you've got a frigate in this wave, that Emergent Preserver, those frigates really do like to aggro drones, so be aware that your drones are likely going to get shot at during this first wave. I like to take out the Awakened Upholder first, then I go on to the Sleepless Defender. You should be trying to get that Awakened Upholder down as quickly as possible, keeping your traversal up against the Defender for as best you can. Once you are then moving on to your second target, the Sleepless Defender itself, start to spiral inwards. Get nice and close and start to, close the gap in on that. Nice easy way to just bring yourself a little bit closer and then take out that Sleepless Defender as your second target. Now, it's worth mentioning that because that Emergent Preserver does have a scram on you, if you happen to spot someone on D-scan and you think, oh crap, I need to get out of here, you're going to have to pretty much abandon the site. Nuke that Emergent Preserver to get the scram off you so that you can warp away safely, but be aware that that is now going to have triggered wave number 2, so if you're coming back in, you're going to be coming back into, well, whatever was left of wave 1 plus wave 2, and that can be overwhelming, so do bear that in mind. If you have to jump out and kill that Emergent Preserver early, you've probably wrecked the site in order to do so. You might be lucky enough to come back in and grab your MTU with whatever loot you've managed to get. I would ultimately just write it off at that point and move onwards. Speaking of Wave 2, however, Wave 2 is a bit of an okay wave. It's got an annoying Awakened Upholder in it again with its web and its newt. Fortunately, it's not the trigger, so you can just nuke that bad boy off the grid as soon as possible. We then have 3 other frigates, the Awakened Defenders, straight up DPS. These can be largely ignored by the Sacrilege. We then have 2 Emergent Defender frigates with webs and 2 Emergent Upholder frigates with remote reps and newts. Again, these annoyingly are the trigger, so you're going to want to kill off that Awakened Upholder nice and quickly to reduce the severe web and newt that puts on you. Then get rid of one of the Emergent Upholder frigates to get rid of the remote rep and one of the other neutralizers, but you're going to have to leave that second Emergent Upholder alive, otherwise you're going to trigger Wave 3 early with a whole bunch of Wave 2 ships still on screen, and that's just a bad idea no matter which way you spin it. With the first Awakened Upholder down and the first Emergent Upholder down, I tend to go on to the Emergent Defenders because they've got webs, they're slowing me down and thus increasing the amount of damage I take. Then I'll take out the 3 Awakened Defender cruisers before going back to that last Emergent Upholder and triggering Wave 3. Wave 3 then is nice and straightforward, although it does hit pretty hard if you're not prepared. You have a Sleepless Preserver battleship that does remote reps, and a Sleepless Defender battleship that has webs. Now this can be a bit tricky because again those webs are going to slow you down and increase the amount of damage you take. If you don't have good traversal, those battleships hit for rather hefty alpha damage. Make sure that you are getting your traversal up as quickly as possible. Make sure that you have the Assault Damage Control unit available for use before triggering Wave 3, just in case you need it while closing the gap with one of these. Now, I absolutely recommend going for the Sleepless Preserver first because that remote rep is going to keep the Sleepless Defender alive for a long time, but it can't remote rep itself. So you go after the Preserver, take that one down, and it does take a little bit of time to chunk through, and you should be okay doing so as long as you can get a nice tight orbit on it. I try to orbit around 5,000 meters, and that seems to do the job quite nicely. That one stops hitting you. You just got to be aware that the other one will occasionally shoot you as your traversal obviously lowers because you're going in a circle. There are going to be times when you're approaching or moving directly away from, rather than being a beam and thus having high traversal. That said, it's not the worst wave out there. It does sting a little bit if you're not particularly careful, but get that Sleepless Preserver down first, and then you can move on to the Sleepless Defender afterwards. Then you have 2 cruisers, both Awakened Defenders. These I tend to take out. You can take them out last. They're just DPS, so they're not a huge problem. I know some people do like to take them out after the remote repping Sleepless Preserver, but for me, I tend to take out both the battleships first, then go for the cruisers to finish the site. The Oruze Construct has arguably one of the most awkward waves ever for its entry-level wave. You see, you're going to have two Wakeful Sentry turrets. These things hit hard, they have really good range, and fortunately they have fairly low tracking, so if you get your traversal up quickly, you can kind of not worry too much about those. The trouble is that you're going to have at least 4 Awakened Upholders, and if you're familiar at all with C3 ratting sites at this point, Awakened Upholders should be well and truly on your radar. These are the gits that like to orbit at 30 kilometers away from you whilst webbing you and neutralizing you. And they do 6 gigajoules of newts per second each, so that's 24 gigajoules of newt per second, while you've got the 4 of them on you, whilst they are also webbing you to slow you right the hell down. This is genuinely awful, and it's made even worse by there being a possible spawn of an Awakened Preserver, which is a cruiser with remote reps. Now, despite the fact that there is a remote rep ship on the grid here, I still try to take out those Awakened Upholders as quickly as possible. Get your traversal up, use your assault damage control if you really need to avoid the damage from those Wakeful Sentry turrets as you arrive in sight. While you're getting your traversal up against those, make sure that assault damage control unit is there available if you need to reduce your incoming damage. Then nuke ideally 2 or 3 of those Awakened Upholders straight off the bat. Annoyingly, they are the trigger for Wave 2, so you can't just kill all 4 of the Awakened Upholders. Get rid of 3 of them, so you're down to 1 web and 1 6 gigajoule per second neutralizer. Well worth just getting those down as quickly as possible. Even though there is a remote repper on the field, the Sacrilege should have enough damage to get those down. And quite frankly, the amount of neutralization and webbing going on there is extraordinarily dangerous. There is nothing worse than running out of capacitor, being slow moving, whilst you've got those sentry towers nuking you. So I tend to take out 3 of the Awakened Upholders straight off the bat, then go for the Awakened Preserver if it's present to get rid of that remote repping ability. Then I'll take out the 2 Wakeful Sentry Towers before triggering Wave 2 by taking out that last Awakened Upholder. Now, Wave 2 isn't too bad. We've got a Sleepless Defender, a battleship with a web, and that is going to be our trigger, followed by 4 Emergent Defenders. These are frigates with webs. Fortunately, the Emergent Defenders go down very, very quickly. Shoot those and they die very, very fast, so you shouldn't have too much trouble getting rid of either of those. Now, the Sleepless Defender, that's going to be your last target. Try and get your traversal up against it nice and quickly, orbit that at 500, and then you can just shoot the frigates without really worrying. The frigates are going to try and get within sort of 7-8 kilometers of you anyway. They are going to follow you and stay nice and close. Go after the 4 frigates first, then take out the battleship. Again, obviously the Sacrilege is going to be using drones. Be very aware of the amount of aggro that your drones are taking. You may have to recall them a couple of times because you do have 4 frigates trying to shoot at you, but once the frigates are down, the battleship tends to just ignore your drones, and so you can very comfortably just shoot that down and trigger into Wave 3. Wave 3 then is another battleship, a Sleepless Upholder, which has a neutralizer, and 2 Awakened Preserver cruisers, each with remote reps. Now, those remote reps are singularly awful, so you do need to take out both those cruisers first of all. Trying to out DPS 2 remote reps while killing a battleship isn't a fun time for anyone, so take out one of those cruisers as hard and fast as you can. If you've got rage missiles, this is the perfect time to use them. Put your drones on the target, consider overheating if you have to, just to get at least one of those down as quickly as possible, because they will try to remote rep each other. Obviously they can't remote rep themselves, so once the first one's down, you're pretty good to take out the second one with very little concern. You're going to need your traversal up because you are up against a battleship and it does hit hard. It is going to be neutralizing you to the tune of 10 gigajoules a second, which does sting quite a bit, but you should be okay. The Sacrilege should be comfortably able to deal with that amount of neutralization, and you can always single rep. In fact, you'll probably find that by time you've got both the Awakened Preservers down, the battleship itself you're orbiting nice and closely, so it's not actually hitting you anymore, at which point you can turn off both of the reps for the most part and just let your capacitor recharge and not worry about the fact that you're being muted out. Ultimately, that is arguably the most difficult part of this particular anomaly. The first and third waves are singularly awful. There's also large distances between the different spawns, so be aware that you may be out of range of the next wave when it spawns in, and that is going to require some manual piloting. Be aware that when this happens, especially in the waves that have battleships, you're going to be manually piloting towards a battleship that has very high damage but poor tracking. Keep that traversal up, use the assault damage control if you have to, and do be prepared to overheat either or both of your armor repairers. It's not a fun situation, but there are definitely situations where you can see in the footage here, I've had to overheat my armor repairers due to just bad positioning from the battleships and how they move around the field whilst you're trying to do other things. This is why you always carry nanite repair paste in your hold when flying the Sacrilege. Keep that in mind though, and things should be pretty straightforward. It's not too bad a sight. You just kind of need to make sure that in that first wave you're taking out at least 3 of those upholders as quickly as possible. It is kind of a DPS check more than a tank check in this case, so get those nuked. The rest of the site isn't too bad. The Outpost Frontier Stronghold is then the one that a lot of people seem to have nightmares about, and it can be tough. Certainly the Sacrilege here is going to need to overheat at points to make sure that you do have a good amount of nanite repair paste. Straight away you can see there I've walked into the site and my shields are just gone, along with about 25% of my armor just from one hit from those Argos turrets. You've got 3 Argos turrets. These do extraordinary amounts of alpha damage. They do have a fairly slow rate of fire and their tracking's not particularly good, so get your traversal up as quickly as possible. We're also going to have a Sleepless Defender in here. This is a fairly fast-moving battleship that uses webs. That's going to be the trigger for the next wave, so we need to largely ignore it for the time being. Try and keep your traversal up against all 3 of the turrets and the Sleepless Defender. This is why people don't like the Outpost Frontier, because it does require a pretty intensive amount of player piloting skill. You need to be able to manually pilot quite comfortably in order to keep your traversal up against 3 static targets and 1 moving one, whilst also maintaining range. So do be aware of that. That is going to be a concern early on in this, otherwise you can take extraordinary amounts of damage. So the assault damage control is going to really help you out when things start to go wrong. Take out the 3 Argos turrets, and then we go for the Sleepless Defender. By the time you've taken out the 3 Argos, the Sleepless Defender should be fairly close, and you just start to spiral in on it. If you can get to a 5,000 meter orbit, you'll find that it just stops hitting you, and it's pretty straightforward at that point. The web is kind of nasty, but you should be able to ignore it for the most part. The Sacrilege doesn't care that much about one web, it only cares when there are multiple webs on it. Now, Wave 2 of the Outpost is actually probably the most comfortable and most straightforward wave in the entirety of every C3 combat site. It's simply 4 cruisers, all awakened defenders. They have no special abilities. They just orbit at 15 kilometers and shoot you. That's it. And they are obviously the trigger because that's all that's in this wave. So you just take out those 4 ships and you're done. It's literally that simple for Wave 2. It's the easiest wave in any of the C3 sites, so just don't stress it. Kill them one by one and get ready for Wave 3, because Wave 3 is a bit of a nasty one. Wave 3 then, 4 frigates, emergent defenders, each armed with webs, and 2 battleships, sleepless defenders, also armed with webs. So you're going to have 6 webs on you early on, with 2 battleships that do a scary amount of alpha damage. The fact that they have terrible tracking doesn't matter when you've got 2 of them sitting slightly apart from each other, and you're webbed to the point that you can barely move 50 meters per second. It is a really rough start to the wave. You're going to need the assault damage controls. You may need to overheat your armor repairers, so again, do be aware that you're going to want to have that nanite repair paste with you, so that when you are turning off one of those, you can repair it. Once it's repaired, switch it back on, turn the other one off, and start to repair that with the nanite repair paste as well. Ultimately, get that traversal up as quickly as possible. You're going to be running 2 different battleships. You need to have traversal up against both of them at all times. Those 4 frigates, fortunately, do die quite quickly. Be aware they are frigates, so drone aggro is extreme, especially since there's 4 of them. Up to you if you even want to bother launching the drones. You will have to pull them back during that wave. I can pretty much guarantee it. But essentially, get rid of those 4 emergent defender frigates first of all to get 4 webs off you. This will start to make the rest of this wave a little bit easier. At that point, get as close as you can to one of those battleships, spiral inwards, get a 5,000 meter orbit set up. That battleship will no longer hit you. The other one is still going to be dealing some hefty damage, so be aware that you are going to have to watch your armor repairers and make sure that everything is running up to standard there. You're going to take a lot of damage in that, just be aware, but once one of those battleships is down and you're orbiting the second one, sight is basically done because you're orbiting something that is going to really struggle to hit you. You're going to take very little damage. It's just going to take a while to chunk through it, but that's all time that your MTU is going to be harvesting up everything else. So it's pretty straightforward. Don't stress it too much. Essentially, once you've got that first battleship down, the rest of the Outpost Frontier Stronghold isn't too bad. Wave 1 and Wave 3 are awful. Wave 2 is really quite nice. It's fairly straightforward. Just be aware this site is going to require some overheating. It is going to require careful use of the assault damage control unit. As long as you're mindful of that, things should go pretty smoothly, and it's a decent site. These are actually arguably the best site to run because you get the most amount of ISK per hit points, meaning the amount of hit points the enemies have and the ISK the site pays out works out actually in your favor of all 4 sites. It's the one that if you can run it quickly, you are going to make the most ISK per hour. So I tend to prioritize the Outpost Frontiers first, then look at the other 3 afterwards. Outpost Frontiers are the hardest but the best ISK per hour, whereas the Fortification Frontier Strongholds are probably the easiest. But again, the entire point of this series is showing you how to do all 4 of the sites so that when your mates are stealing all the Fortification Frontier Strongholds, you can run into the Oruze, the Outpost Frontier, or the Solar Cell and run those quite comfortably too. And again, the Sacrilege is going to do really well in all 4 sites. Just follow these tips and you should be okay. Anyway, folks, that's about everything for this video. Hopefully that's inspired you to give the Amarr Empire, or Carnage Kingdom, Sacrilege another look at as an excellent little C3 ratting ship. It's also very popular in PvP, so if you've got a few of these hulls sitting around, some fit for PvP, some fit for PvE, you can kind of skill into one ship that is going to do a lot of different things for you, and it's a lot cheaper than, say, a Legion. I know the Legion's a very popular ship, Tech 3 Cruiser makes it very expensive, and the Legion, for some reason, is much more expensive than the other 3 in order to get it up and running properly. So the Sacrilege does make an excellent PvE ship that can also be refit for PvP when you need it. Anyway, let me know how you get on with the Sacrilege. If you have different fits that you use for the different sites, let me know. Remember, I'm showcasing one fit that runs all 4 sites so that you don't have to worry about mobile depots or going back and refitting at a station. Obviously, if you are only going to be running one particular site, you can modify the fit in order to make it better for that specific site. As an example, for the Oruze, you might decide that you want a bit more cap stability so that you can handle all of those awakened up holders a little bit easier. For the Outpost Frontier, you might decide you want a little bit of tank. You swap some of the stuff around in the low slots to apply more tank and less DPS, just to make it easier to survive. Fortification Frontier, you may find that, of course, you're not taking that much damage, so you could swap an armor repairer for another ballistic control unit or something like that. There's multiple ways you can modify this fit. I'm not here to tell you the best for each of the 4 sites. I'm giving you a fit that works for all 4 of the sites. With all that said and done then, let me know how you get on. Otherwise, happy sailing and see you in New Eden.